Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started as a simple trip, one night in a quiet hotel, a stopover that was never meant to mean anything. But sometimes, the things we don't plan are the ones that change us the most. That night, I saw a side of him I had never noticed before, and once I did, there was no going back. We had been friends for years, close enough to know each other's habits, yet distant enough to keep our feelings buried. He was the calm one, the kind who never spoke more than he needed to. I was the opposite, loud, curious, always trying to fill the silence. When our group trip got canceled at the last minute, it ended up being just the two of us. One room. One night. A mistake, maybe. Or fate. The hotel was nothing fancy, just an old place off the highway, with soft yellow lights flickering through the hallway. The kind of place where time feels slower and small details suddenly matter. I remember the rain tapping against the window, the faint hum of music from his phone, and how he looked at me when I laughed at something on TV. It wasn't the same look he used to give me. It was softer, deeper, and for the first time, it scared me. We talked more that night than we had in months. About work, about dreams, about people who had hurt us. There was something raw in the air, maybe the storm outside, maybe the comfort of knowing no one else was watching. His words started to feel heavier, closer to something real. And when he said my name, slowly, like he didn't want to forget the sound of it, something inside me shifted. But the truth is, nothing really happened. Not in the way people might imagine. It wasn't about crossing lines or breaking rules. It was the silence after the laughter, the way our hands brushed when we reached for the same glass, the quiet tension that neither of us wanted to name. That's what changed everything. By the time morning came, I realized I couldn't look at him the same way again. There was something unspoken between us, a truth hanging in the air that neither of us dared to say out loud. He smiled before we left, like he knew exactly what I was thinking, but didn't want to ruin it by putting it into words. Maybe it was just one night. Maybe it meant nothing. But tell me, have you ever had a moment so small, so ordinary, that it somehow changed the way you saw someone forever? After that night, things between us were different, not in an obvious way, but in the quiet pauses and the glances that lingered a little too long. We went back to our normal lives, or at least we tried to. The hotel became a memory we didn't talk about, yet it hovered around us like a secret only we knew. Every time he texted, even something as simple as "Did you get home safe?" or "You left your charger," it carried a weight that wasn't there before. His name was Ethan. We met 3 years ago through mutual friends, back when neither of us was looking for anything serious. He was dependable, the kind of person who never canceled plans and always showed up when he said he would. Over time, he became the person I trusted the most, the one I'd call when something went wrong, or when I just needed someone to listen. But until that night, I'd never really seen him. Not the way I did under that soft hotel light, when his guard was down and mine was slipping too. After the trip, we saw each other less often. Maybe we were both avoiding something we didn't want to face. But fate has a strange sense of humor. It kept pushing us back into each other's lives. We worked in the same downtown area, crossed paths at coffee shops, bumped into each other at friends' birthdays. Every time it happened, that same quiet tension would return. It was almost like time would pause for a second, and I'd remember the way he looked at me that night, not like a friend, but like someone he couldn't quite have. One evening, I found myself sitting across from him again, this time in a small diner after work. It wasn't planned, it just happened. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from overthinking. He smiled when he saw me, but his eyes said something else. "You've been distant," he said softly. I laughed it off, said something about being busy, but we both knew that wasn't it. There was a long silence between us, the kind that felt too full to ignore. I wanted to ask him if he thought about that night too, if he ever wondered what would have happened if we hadn't stopped ourselves. But the words stayed locked inside me. Instead, I asked about work, about his plans for the weekend, anything to keep things safe. He went along with it, but I could see he wanted to say something, too. It's strange how two people can sit inches apart and still feel miles away. That's what that night did. It created a space between us, a mix of curiosity and fear neither of us could name. Later, when I got home, I found a message from him. I keep thinking about that night, about what it meant. I stared at it for a long time, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I didn't feel the same. But another part, the one that still remembered the sound of his voice in that quiet hotel room, couldn't let it go. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us only grew stronger. We were friends on the surface, yet beneath it, a current of unspoken feelings pulled at both of us in ways that were impossible to ignore. Every interaction became a careful dance, too close, and someone might reveal more than they intended, too distant, and the pull grew unbearable. It was exhausting and intoxicating all at once. Ethan started inviting me out more, but always in ways that could pass as casual. Coffee after work, a walk through the park, lunch when no one else was around. I could tell he was testing the waters, trying to see how much I'd let him in without pushing too far. And I was doing the same, measuring every word, every laugh, every lingering glance. We weren't ready to admit what was happening, but that didn't stop the moments from happening. One afternoon, he showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a small bouquet of flowers. For no reason, he said with a half smile, but I knew there was a reason. My heart raced. Was it a simple gesture, or a confession disguised as kindness? I didn't answer immediately. I took the flowers, our fingers brushing for a second too long. That brief contact sent sparks through me, and I could see it in his eyes. He felt it too. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle changes in him. He seemed distracted, checking his phone more than usual, disappearing into moments of silence that were unusual for him. I wanted to ask, to demand an explanation, but I hesitated. Was he talking to someone else? Or was it just his own thoughts, tangled with the emotions he couldn't voice? The uncertainty gnawed at me, feeding both anxiety and curiosity. At work, things weren't any easier. We had mutual colleagues who noticed our subtle changes, the way we lingered near each other or exchanged looks that weren't quite normal for friends. Rumors started forming, innocent jokes from people who didn't know the whole story. I found myself laughing along, but inside, I was constantly thinking about that night at the hotel and everything that had shifted since. It was like living in two worlds, one where we were just friends, and one where everything had already changed, but neither of us admitted it. Then came the evening that pushed everything to the edge. Ethan invited me to a quiet rooftop cafe, the city lights sparkling below us. It should have been romantic, though we never called it that. We sat across from each other, talking about trivial things, but the tension was so thick you could almost touch it. At one point, his hand brushed mine as he reached for his drink, and we both froze, neither pulling away, neither moving closer. After that rooftop evening, everything felt sharper. Every word, every look, every accidental touch carried a weight we couldn't ignore. The silence between us started to speak louder than any conversation ever could. It was maddening, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. I found myself replaying the moments over and over in my mind, trying to decipher his expressions, his hesitations, the way he lingered a fraction longer than necessary. A week later, Ethan invited me on a weekend trip, just the two of us. He said it was to escape the chaos of work, to clear our heads. I knew there was more to it. I could feel it in the way he said my name, in the way his eyes met mine when he wasn't looking at anything in particular. I accepted, even though my heart was pounding at the thought of being alone with him again. The drive was quiet, filled with an unspoken tension that neither of us broke. Every glance felt charged, every laugh a little too knowing. When we arrived at the small cabin by the lake, the air seemed to thrum with possibility. We unpacked silently, the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable. It's heavy, electric, waiting for a spark. That evening, as we sat by the fire, I noticed how the shadows danced across his face, highlighting his jawline, the way his lips moved when he spoke softly. I couldn't look away. He caught me staring and gave that small, almost guilty smile that made my stomach flip. There was something in that look, a mix of longing and hesitation, as if he was battling the same invisible force I was. We talked about everything and nothing, laughter mixing with confessions we'd never shared before. At one point, I reached for a blanket and our hands touched. Neither of us pulled away. My mind screamed caution, yet my heart urged me to stay, to feel, to see where this could go. He looked at me, eyes searching, and I swear I could see the same question reflected back at me. Do we dare cross this line? Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the quiet sounds of the lake. Everything seemed suspended in time, like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. The tension between us was unbearable, thrilling, impossible to ignore. Every heartbeat, every glance, every hesitation was a countdown to something neither of us could predict. At that moment, I realized the story was no longer about friendship or hesitation. It was about choice, desire, and the undeniable pull we had tried so hard to ignore. And as Ethan leaned slightly closer, our faces inches apart, I could feel the storm building inside us, around us, and in the air between every word we hadn't said. Just as the tension between us reached its peak, the unexpected happened, a knock at the cabin door that shattered the fragile bubble we had created. I froze, heart hammering, unsure if I wanted to move or pretend I hadn't heard it. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. He whispered, "Stay here," but his voice carried an edge that made me uneasy. When he opened the door, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face, someone I hadn't expected to see at all. It was Claire, a colleague we both knew, but more than that, she had always been close to Ethan. Too close, perhaps. She smiled, casual and effortless, like she had no idea the tension already charged the room. But I could see the way Ethan's shoulders stiffened, the slight hesitation before he greeted her. My stomach sank. Something was happening that I didn't understand, and it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. Claire lingered longer than necessary, asking about the trip, commenting on how perfect the cabin was, and teasing Ethan about plans he had mentioned. Every word, every laugh, seemed to wedge itself between us, threatening to undo the fragile connection we had built. I caught myself gripping the blanket tighter, trying to mask the rush of jealousy I hadn't anticipated. But the worst part wasn't her presence, it was the way Ethan handled it. He smiled, polite but distant, and there was a hesitation in his voice when he replied. That hesitation spoke volumes, and it made me question everything I thought I knew. After she left, the room felt colder, emptier, and heavier. Ethan didn't speak at first. He just sat there, staring into the fire as if trying to burn away the awkward tension. I wanted to ask him if there was something going on between them, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched him, searching his face for any sign of what I should believe. There was a part of me that wanted to trust him, to believe that this was just a coincidence, yet another part of me, the part that had been aching with unspoken desire, couldn't help but feel betrayed. I didn't expect her to come, he finally said, voice low, almost vulnerable. It's complicated. I leaned closer, my heart in my throat, daring him to explain, to reveal the truth. But he stopped, shook his head, and said nothing more. That single sentence, so vague yet so heavy, was enough to leave me hanging between hope and doubt. In that moment, I realized the stakes had changed. Our connection, the one night that had altered everything, wasn't just between us anymore. There were other forces, other emotions, other people who could twist our feelings into something unrecognizable. The uncertainty made my pulse race. Every laugh, every glance, every lingering touch became charged with a new level of intensity. The tension between us finally snapped that night, in a moment I will never forget. Ethan stood up from the fire, his hands trembling slightly, and finally looked at me with an intensity that left me breathless. I can't keep pretending, he said, his voice low but steady. I've been trying to hide it, to stay just friends, but I can't. Not after that night in the hotel, not after everything. My heart skipped, a mix of relief and fear washing over me. I opened my mouth to respond, but he continued, taking a step closer. I know it's messy. I know there's complications, he admitted, glancing briefly at the door as if expecting someone else to appear, but I can't deny what I feel for you anymore. In that instant, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. The firelight flickered across his face, making his eyes glisten with something I had never seen before, raw, honest emotion. I wanted to speak, to tell him that I felt the same, that I had felt it since that night in the hotel. But before I could say anything, he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from my face, and the tension between us exploded into something undeniable. Our lips met in a kiss that was long overdue, hesitant at first, then deep and unrestrained, the kind that left no room for doubt. Just as I thought the moment would hold forever, a sudden sound from outside the cabin shattered the intensity, the unmistakable honk of a car. Ethan pulled back immediately, concern flashing across his face. It can't be, he murmured, rushing to the window. My pulse quickened. I had no idea what was coming next, and the warmth from our kiss was replaced by a fresh wave of uncertainty. Through the window, I saw Claire stepping out of a car, holding something in her hands. But instead of anger or confrontation, her face held an expression I hadn't expected, one of worry. She was carrying a small bundle, a puppy, wrapped in a blanket. Ethan turned to me, exhaling shakily. I promised I'd help her take care of it, he said, his voice tight. My heart sank for a moment, thinking it was another complication, another obstacle. But then I realized the tension had been real, but it wasn't about betrayal. It was about trust, boundaries, and the courage to admit feelings. I laughed quietly, a mix of relief and disbelief. You're ridiculous, I said, but my hand found his again. He smiled, a little sheepishly, but his eyes never left mine. In that moment, the storm that had been building between us, desire, uncertainty, jealousy, fear, finally settled into something real. As we sat back by the fire, the puppy now nestled between us, I felt the weight lift. Our connection had been tested, twisted, and almost broken, but we had survived, together. Or so I thought. Because just as I leaned into him, ready to feel safe at last, my phone buzzed. A message from someone I hadn't heard from in months appeared on the screen, and my stomach dropped. The message on my phone glowed in the dim firelight, making my heart skip again. I hesitated before opening it, fearing it might undo the fragile peace Ethan and I had finally found. But when I read the words, I couldn't help but laugh quietly, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over me. It was from an old friend, someone who had always pushed me to take risks, reminding me not to let fear hold me back. Somehow, in the chaos of emotions and uncertainty, I realized that the real lesson of this weekend wasn't just about Ethan or the hotel, or even Claire. It was about embracing honesty and courage in every part of life. Ethan reached over and took my hand, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Everything okay? He asked softly. I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fire. Yes, I said. Everything's okay. And I don't want to waste another moment hiding how I feel. He smiled wider, and for the first time, it felt like there was nothing between us. Not walls, not doubts, not jealousy, not fear. Just us. We spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, and planning small adventures together, letting the tension dissolve into something beautiful and real. Even Claire's puppy seemed to sense it, snuggling close as if affirming the peace that had finally settled over the cabin. By the time the morning sun crept over the lake, everything felt lighter, freer. We didn't need to rush or explain. The unspoken understanding between us was stronger than any words. I realized that sometimes love isn't about dramatic confessions or perfect timing. It's about being present, taking chances, and trusting that the person beside you is willing to do the same. As we packed up to leave, I looked at Ethan and felt a deep sense of gratitude. That one night in a hotel had started it all, but it was our honesty, our patience, and our willingness to face uncertainty together that had brought us here. And even though the journey had been complicated, messy, and full of suspense, I wouldn't change a single moment. So, what do you think about our story? Would you take a risk for someone you care about, even if it meant facing uncertainty? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if you want a sequel exploring where our love story goes next, let me know. Summary: it was just one night in a hotel, but it made me see him in a way I never should have. Is a romantic story about friendship turning into love, exploring the tension, unspoken feelings, and emotional complexities that arise from one unforgettable night. Through suspense, jealousy, and vulnerability, the story captures the delicate balance between desire and hesitation, ultimately leading to honesty and connection.